What's up, everybody? I was debating on what subject to do next, and I opened up Studio, and this was the first comment I saw in regards to the last video on Gnosticism. And yeah, that's fine. I'm not sitting here trying to claim that what the Gnostics say is right. I find it very interesting. And it's really cool that some of their ideas are ideas that I had already thought of before even studying into Gnosticism. It had occurred to me when looking at the ancient gods and demons that beings used to be more powerful and that we've kind of been watered down as a creation since then. Where with Gnosticism, you have the monad, the true Father in heaven creator, and from him spring the aeons. And then from them came lesser entities, and each successive generation away from the Father is less powerful. And then the other thing, which is a big one, which again I had already concluded prior to getting into Gnosticism, was that Yahweh of the Old Testament is not the Father that Jesus was talking about. And if you're a Christian, just stop and hear me out and watch this video. I grew up Christian, was taught Jesus loves you, then got older and got into the Old Testament. And then I think most people just do kind of a face smack and say, well, this doesn't sound very loving, and then spend the rest of their lives trying to reconcile the mystery. Well, as soon as you figure out that Jesus was trying to save us from Yahweh and not for Yahweh, then the mystery's solved. And I'll let the Bible make the case. This is John 8. The crowd says, the law of Moses commands us to stone such women, this adulteress. What do you say? And this was the Pharisees using the question as a trap. In the big picture of things, which I'm not going to get too far into, but Jesus had to live by Yahweh's law in order to fulfill the contract. And he simply says, let any of you who are without sin be the first to cast a stone. And you will find that he does this with almost every one of Moses's laws. But it's very clear that he's speaking to the Pharisees and the Yahwehdians here. And he says, you do not know me or my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. He is directly telling the followers of Yahweh that you do not know my Father, the true God in heaven who sent him. And once again, right here, it makes it very clear who he's speaking to. The followers of Yahweh. And he says, you are from below, I am from above. You are of this world, I am not of this world. Then he goes full ballistic on him. If God were your father, you would love me, for I have come here from God. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a red rummer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. I don't know how much more of a scathing rebuke he could give here, but he tells the followers of Yahweh that you belong to your father, the devil. So now let's go through the book of Exodus, and I'll tell it like I would if I was making a Hollywood movie about this. Preachers like to dip their toe into the OT and pull one or two lines out and then turn it into a morality story, but none of them will ever give you the whole big picture in like storybook form. They focus on this verse and that, call it a miracle, and then move on. This isn't me reinterpreting the meaning of the text. This is just me focusing on the parts that, if this were any other story, people would zone in on. And Yahweh is polar opposite of the teachings of Jesus. So this might be a little annoying. I'm going to be jumping through to the important bits of the text, but I'm going to show it instead of pictures so you see that's exactly what it says. And I'm going to use the NLV just for simplicity. This is where Moses first meets Yahweh at the burning bush. Yahweh says, I've heard the cries of the Hebrews. I'm tapping you to lead them and take them to the land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Pezerites, Hivites, and Jebusites. It is a good and spacious land. Okay, so if somebody came along and said, hey, let's move up to Canada, there's all kinds of fertile land, it'll be great. You're not thinking that you're going to have to go up there and off everyone so that you can then live there. And nothing's mentioned about that here. You'll find that all the promises from Yahweh are double-edged. Okay, so great. We're all going to the land of milk and honey. Moses asks, well, when they ask what your name is, who you are, what am I supposed to say? And God says, I am who I am. That's Yahweh. And I've heard that the more accurate translation of that is, I am who I say I am. Like, I'm whatever I say I am, dude. Don't question me. I'm telling you where to go and what to do. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. I'm going to skip forward a couple chapters, and it says, I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai. Our modern Bibles just say the Lord and God all the way through, but this is two different names here. And he says, to your fathers I was known as El Shaddai, but now my name is Yahweh. I did not make myself fully known to them. But now my name is Yahweh forever and ever from generation to generation. So that's a whole subject in and of itself. But in Genesis, Jacob wrestles with one of the Elohim and lives to tell the tale. But as you will see with Yahweh in Exodus, no man shall see his face and live. I'll just leave that there. This will turn into a 6-hour seminar. What is it that Yahweh wants out of this? He wants them to go out into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to him. Jesus, by the way, says that no, my Father doesn't require the blood of innocent animals, but Yahweh's future temple is basically just a slaughterhouse. He says, the king of Egypt will not let you go, so I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. Jesus teaches everyone to come to the Father, but you'll see that not once does Yahweh try to compel any of the other nations that he's the true God. Instead, he just wants them all annihilated, and the main reason is because they worship other gods, other Elohim. This is a full-on myth that the OT teaches one God. Even the rabbis will tell you, no, it's not one God. He's just the God of Yeezy. And Yahweh says he'll make the Egyptians suffer so much that they're going to give you all their gold, all their silver, all their nice clothing just for you to leave. And so you will plunder the Egyptians. Then he taught Moses some magic, had him throw his staff down and it turned into a snake. The Pharaoh's magicians could do the same thing. They could bring about frogs. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Everybody's heard of the 10 plagues of Egypt. These were Yahweh's miracles, as to where Jesus's miracles were healing and feeding the multitudes, casting out demons, helping people. And really the 10 wonders of Yahweh here sound like Catastrophism 101. But we're still at the burning bush where Moses just met Yahweh, and Moses says, I'm slow of speech, maybe I'm not the best guy for the job. And you start seeing part of Yahweh's true colors. His anger burned against Moses in their very first meeting. Yahweh can barely suffer to have to deal with humans. But now Moses has his marching orders, and before he even gets to Egypt, at a lodging place on the way, Yahweh met with Moses and was about to off him. But Zipporah, his wife, took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. Now, we have no idea why Yahweh wanted to off Moses, or how old her son was, but there's never a good age to get the tip of your thing cut off. You would think the younger he was, the worse it would be, but this practice, they used to do it like at 8 days. And I really can't think of a more demonic practice. You are mutilating, I don't want to be too graphic on here, but you guys get the idea. You're MK Ultra level traumatizing a kid at 1 week old, and that's just an insidious experience for someone to have fresh in this world. But Zipporah cut the tip off, and now Yahweh is satisfied. Everything is always sealed in blood with him. During the last of the 10 plagues, they put lamb's blood over the door so that the angel of the Lord would know who not to touch. So the almighty, all-knowing God doesn't know his own people. They literally sprinkle blood all over themselves to identify themselves as one of his. Okay, so the whole Egypt scene happens, and now they're leaving there. Now Yahweh says, the firstborn of all of your livestock belong to me, meaning sacrifice. He says you can redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey, but if you do not redeem it, then break its neck, and redeem every firstborn among your sons. Still to this day, they pay a Cohen 5 pieces of silver to redeem a firstborn son. I don't know what happens if you don't have 5 shekels. Now they're out wandering around through other people's lands, completely uninvited. But in some undefined way, Yahweh helps to deliver them into their hands, and they took over all of that land, which is a practice still happening today. And then taunting the king of that land, Moses says, will you not take what your God, Chemos, gave you? This is one of many times where it says other people have other gods, and Yahweh is now the God of Yeezy. Then comes the parting of the Red Sea, once again done with the magic staff. And Yahweh hardens the hearts of the Egyptians, so they rush in after him. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh. Now, you would think that a loving, benevolent God, he might do this to teach them that he is the true God and the error of their ways, and then say, now you guys worship me and all is forgiven. But no, Yahweh can't wait to show off his might. So now they're on the other side of the Red Sea. There's no turning back. They've basically been press-ganged into this at this point. They travel through barren desert for 3 days, and then they finally find water, but it's bitter. It's contaminated. So Yahweh gives them some piece of wood to throw in there, and it became potable. There's always some trick to whatever happens. And I don't know if it's science and technology or supernatural, but most of the miracles are done using Moses' staff instead of just, I will it, so it's done. So they're 3 days into a desert. There's no turning back. Yahweh finally shows mercy and leads them to water. I grew up around all kinds of people with livestock, and nobody would ever let their cow go 3 days without water. This is deliberate psychological conditioning. Then he issues an order saying, if you pay attention to every little thing that I say here, I won't even bring any diseases on you like I did the Egyptians. I might even let you drink water a couple times a week. And I really want you to think about this situation here. Take all the romanticism out of it, the heart of worship. Give me a break. There are now 600,000 people, allegedly, who have been told they're going to the land of milk and honey. It's going to be great. Now they're stuck in a desert on the outskirts of all of the good lands that have armies that say, no, you guys aren't coming through our land. They are now trapped with nowhere to go, no resources, no water. And now Yahweh tells them, you're going to do every last little thing I tell you to do. And this is just the beginning of things. Fast forward a month or so, on the 15th day of the second month, they, quote, grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, in Egypt we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you've brought us out into this desert to starve the entire assembly. Anyone in this situation would be justifiably upset. I'd be losing my mind. But they just say they grumbled. Then this is where Yahweh gives them manna from heaven. And on the first night, he even gets a bunch of quail to fly into the camp and perish. But the manna was thin flakes like frost on the ground that you went and gathered up and made like a bread with it. And if you kept it till morning, then it began to rot and get full of maggots, which they were told not to do, but they broke a rule already. But you think about it, you've been wandering around for a month without food, you finally get some. Yeah, you're going to keep some till morning, which turns out to be a bad idea. Then a little foreshadowing, the Hebrews ate manna for 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. So the entire next generation came up with nothing but manna. Then they're out wandering the desert some more, no water to drink, so they're getting upset with Moses. So Yahweh tells Moses to take some of the elders and his staff, go to the rock at Horeb, strike the rock, and water will come out. Now, that's a really important detail. He says here to take your staff and strike the rock. Everybody sees that it says that right here. But you have to jump to the book of Numbers for the rest of this story. Here it says, take your staff and speak to the rock. So why do you need the staff to speak to a rock? Are you going to swing it around menacingly till the rock splits open? The staff is somehow doing these miracles. But here he says to speak to the rock, and Moses goes out, raised his arm, and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out. But Yahweh says, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Yeezys, you will not bring this community into the land I will give them. So now the original deal's off the table. This is the general that he selected to lead an army out into a desert with no food and water and take all the heat. And now the deal's off. And, you know, you can read that a couple different ways, I guess, since in Exodus it says that he was supposed to strike the rock and here speak to it. Did Yahweh tell him to strike the rock and then afterwards say, no, I didn't say that? But either way, it seems like the punishment doesn't fit the crime here. And don't forget, he was about to off him in his motel room before he ever even got to Egypt, if it weren't for an impromptu circumcision. Next, the Amalekites attacked, and Moses says, I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. Whenever Moses held up his hands with the staff, they were winning, but when he lowered it, they were losing. So they held up his hands and they won. There's something to the staff. All right, then is Mount Sinai. Everybody knows about the 10 Commandments, but there's a bunch of other laws in there. If you sell a daughter as a servant and she doesn't please her master, she's not to go free as a male servant does, but must let her be redeemed, bought back by the parents, I think they're saying. You just can't sell your daughters to foreigners, the goyim. So there's all kinds of rules in here no Christian would even consider today. We use the 10 Commandments in a good way, but this is like the bare minimum of society. Don't off anybody, don't sleep around. But compared to like a Buddhist philosophy, this is pretty barbaric. And Jesus one-ups every one of these laws and says, of course you shouldn't sleep with your neighbor's wife. If you've even thought about it, then you're already sinning, dude. But this is like the bare minimum prison warden rules to keep peace in the camp. You see later on an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for foot. And that's because they're being conditioned into a warrior cult. Everybody focuses on the 10 Commandments alone, but it's a whole book of law on governing a roving city. Just a bunch of common law stuff for settling disputes. And any true Christian today would be disgusted by this. If a man seduces a virgin who is not pledged to be married and sleeps with her, he must pay the bride price. So pretty much the rest of Exodus is what happened on Mount Sinai, how to build the tabernacle and the ark, and then Moses is up there for so long that they build a golden calf out of the jewelry that they stole from the Egyptians. And Sinai's a whole video in itself, but everybody knows the basic story, so we'll move on. The only other thing it says in Exodus about this, when they're leaving, Yahweh sends an angel ahead of them. And he warns Moses about him, saying, don't rebel against him. He won't forgive your rebellion like I do. Okay, Yahweh's already warlord level, but his angel is like ring wraith level. Everyone is terrified of the angels every time they encounter one in the OT. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will send the hornet ahead of you to drive the Hivites, Canaanites, all of them out of your way. But I will not drive them out in a single year because the land would become desolate and the wild animals too numerous for you. So the Almighty God, instead of just, turning the desert into lush habitable land, that would have been one way to settle this. But no, he sends hornets. And let's go back to Egypt. Flies, frogs, lice, locusts, boils. I mean, you would think this is something that Beelzebub would do, not our loving Father in heaven that Jesus told us about. Okay, now you have to jump to Numbers 10 for the rest of the story, but let me set the stage again here. Now Yahweh has laid down the law, and aside from rules for the camp, he's very specific about how he likes his sacrifices done. No yeast whatsoever. That's a very important thing. They've built the tabernacle, so his glory descends into the tent every night. And there's no morality to the law. It's just if you sin against him, then you have to sacrifice to him. And if it's bad enough, then you're kicked out of the camp. But now they're back on the road, and his angel is out driving people out of the lands with hornets and whatnot, slowly over a period of time. Now we're on the 12th day of the second month of the second year. So they've been at this for 2 years, and the cloud of Yahweh lifted from the tabernacle. They set out for the first time at the Lord's command through Moses. Yahweh has now put some of his spirit onto Moses. Take that how you will. And now the rabble among them began to crave food after 2 years of nothing but manna. And Yahweh says, bring me 70 of the elders, and I will take some of the power of the Spirit that is on you and put it on them, and they will share the burden of the people. So look, I'm not saying that Yahweh isn't a powerful God that I wouldn't be terrified of. I don't know what he is. He's one of the gods, but he can control animals. He's got some special powers that he can put on people, make them smart, make them strong. He's just not the God that Jesus is talking about. But the people are wanting a bunch of real food instead of manna. And again, he brings quail and scattered them 2 cubits deep all around the camp, 3 feet deep. All that day and night, and the next day, people went out and gathered the quail. But while the meat was still between their teeth and before it could be consumed, the anger of the Lord burned against the people, and he struck them with a severe plague. So he said, oh, you dare to want food? I'll give you food. And when they're all excited and finally getting some food to eat, he drops them on the spot. Kind of like a trickster god. He'll give you what you want, but then it's not really what you asked for. There's a lot of rug pulls in here. Miriam and Aaron began speaking against Moses, and Yahweh heard about this. It says, "Why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? He's my boy." So he gives Miriam leprosy, but then says, okay, well, she has to stay outside of the camp for 7 days, then she can come back in. As a loving father would, you know. Now we're finally getting to the famed promised land. Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to you guys, and send the leader of each ancestral tribe. So remember that the scouts include the leaders of each tribe for what's coming up next. They went and scouted it and came back and reported, "We went to the land which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit." This is where it takes 2 men to carry back a bundle of grapes, and they say we're like grasshoppers in their eyes. And if you think about this, it sounds like the Canaanites were really living in harmony with the land. It didn't become the land of milk and honey for no reason. Apparently, the Canaanites were extremely good at cultivating the land. But they said the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. And they said the land we explored devours those living in it. So it sounds like everything that was growing there was huge. A pretty blessed land, it sounds like. But now everybody hears that there's giants in that land that we're supposed to go take. And now they're freaked out, wept aloud, grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Once again, they're saying, we had it better off in Egypt. We've been trapped out in this desert for 2 years with nowhere else to go, and now we got to fight giants? So now they're talking about stoning Moses and Aaron. Then the glory of Yahweh appeared at the tent of meeting. So Yahweh's fiery cloud descended to the tent. Yahweh says, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me in spite of all the signs I have performed among them? I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them, but I will make you into a nation greater and stronger than they." By the way, this is the same Moses that he tried to off at the motel room on the way to Egypt, and he reneged on his deal and said, "You're not going into the promised land now because you struck the rock with the stick." But guess how Moses talks Yahweh down out of his anger? He appeals to his ego. Yep. He says, if you do that, then the Egyptians will hear about it. And they've already heard that you go over them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So if the nations hear about this, they will say that Yahweh was not able to bring these people into the land he promised them. On an oath, no less. So he just slaughtered them in the wilderness. So come on, big guy. You can't let the Goyim see you as weak, right? Let them live until we get our new Nephilim palace. Come on, big guy. What do you say?
Well,
Yeah, so Moses saved the chosen by telling Yahweh he would look bad in the eyes of the Egyptians if he offed everyone. Amen. Praise Hashem. So Yahweh, who does not leave the guilty unpunished and punishes the children down to the 3rd and 4th generation. So if you sin against him, he'll take it out on your great-great-grandkids. And he says, not one of you who started out in Egypt will ever see the promised land now. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But Caleb is of a different spirit, and he cool. So now him and his descendants will inherit it. How long will this wicked community grumble against me? So tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness, your bodies will fall, every one of you 20 years old or more who was counted in the census or who has grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hand to make your home. Except Caleb. He cool. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness until the last of your bodies lie in this wilderness. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you. I, the Lord, have spoken. Okay, so everybody in the world has heard about wandering the wilderness for 40 years, right? I bet you'd be hard-pressed to find a Christian who knows why they were wandering for 40 years. It's because a trickster god came along and promised them the land of milk and honey, trapped them out in a desert where they might get water once or twice a week. Then when they found out that to get their promised land, they have to go fight a bunch of giants, they're scared and don't want to go do it. So now every adult is to perish out in this wilderness, while Yahweh MK Ultras the entire next generation growing up to be unthinking, unfeeling mercenaries. Yeah, that's why they wandered in the desert for 40 years. Now, the scouts they had sent out to explore Canaan and came back and told everybody in the camp were struck down and died of a plague before the Lord, except the son of Caleb, Caleb Cool. And you remember who was a part of that scouting mission? The leaders of all of the tribes. So Yahweh just struck the head of every tribe down with a plague, except Caleb, he cool. So now when Moses goes and tells everybody, hey, you're stuck out here in this desert for the rest of your life, sorry, they all mourned bitterly. Then the next morning they set out for the high point in the hill country. Moses says, guys, this is too little, too late. If you go up there, you're going to be defeated because Yahweh isn't with you. But some of them wouldn't listen. They went up against the Canaanites anyway and got beat all the way back to Hormah. So now everybody's stuck in the desert with Yahweh, a whole new round of rules on sacrifices. He wants blood spilling all day, every day for any reason he can think of. Then a power struggle arises. Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, along with 250 elder community leaders, come up against Moses and say, you've gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the rest? So you remember earlier how Yahweh took part of his spirit and put it upon 70 elders, right? Well, they're coming up now saying, hey, we got the juice too, so you're not that big of a deal. Well, this got back to Yahweh. Of course, he's mad. Moses runs out and says, move back from the tents of these wicked men. And everybody moved away from the three instigators here who were standing with their wives, children, and little ones at the entrance of their tents. And Moses says, this is how you'll know it's the Lord and not me. If these men die a natural death and suffer fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about something totally new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them and everything that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the realm of the dead, then you will know that these men have treated the Lord with contempt. As soon as he finished saying all this, the ground under them split apart, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them and their households and all those associated with them, together with their possessions, and they went down alive into the realm of the dead with everything they owned. The earth closed over them, and they perished and were gone from the community. Can I get an amen? That's intense. I bet your preachers never told you about that one, huh? And I want to point out here, they said that they went down into the earth, into the realm of the dead. The realm of the dead is not Yahweh's realm. Yahweh is the God of this world. The Torah has nothing to do with any kind of afterlife. It is just blind obedience to Yahweh, the God of Yeezy in particular, not of everyone. Then after those three and their wives and children, they're all swallowed up, a fire came out of the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. Moses tells Aaron to take his censer and burn incense to atone for the people because a wrath has come out of the Lord and the plague has started. So Aaron ran out with his incense, and then he stood between the living and the dead, but 14,700 had already dropped. So that's about 15,000 people that Yahweh offed in this one fit of rage. But he loves you. I always see George Carlin there when I think of that. Then they set out again. They don't know where they're going. They don't have any food or water. They are grumbling once again. So the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many of them offed. So Moses once again has to plead with Yahweh. And he says, make a snake and put it on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live. So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. Then when anyone was bitten by a snake, they looked at the bronze snake and lived. Now, that's really interesting considering you're not supposed to make any graven image. It's interesting that he picked a serpent for that image, but then again, that's what he's using to torture them with. And by the way, because the Christians use the cross, they consider Christians idolaters, and the punishment for that is stoning, which is literally a lynching where everybody circles around you and throws big rocks until you're gone. And the honest ones will tell you, yes, you're an idolater and you should be offed. Then turn around and act like there's supposed to be some Judeo-Christian unity. Trust me, there is no mutual respect there. So Jesus even talks about this, and he says, which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? I guess I should do a video on the New Testament and the teachings of Jesus at some time, but he does not speak favorably of Yahweh and the law of Moses. He always insists you have to do better than that. So in everything, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This sums up the law and the prophets. That's it. So basically for the next 40 years, Yahweh leads them through the desert with various skirmishes. Anytime they come up against anybody else, he insists you got to off all of them, women, children, livestock, everything. And there's a few people that actually show mercy and they get serious punishment for not doing exactly what Yahweh says and just being mindless, bloodthirsty mercenaries. And of course, Yahweh gets his share of the booty out of all this. In one instance, the tribute of sheep was 675, cattle 72, donkeys 61, and people 32. Now, every once in a while, he will allow the women who have not known a man, so the young virgin girls, to live. And the tribute to the Lord here was 32 virgins. So Moses gave them to Eleazar, the priest, the Levites, and their job is to make sacrifices. So they don't specifically say that they sacrificed 32 virgins right here. I don't know what else they would have done with them. Well, I can think of a few things, unfortunately, but I don't think Yahweh is equipped like that. But in the story of Jephthah, he does sacrifice his daughter to Yahweh. It's 100% clear about what happened. I did a video about it a while back, but you can look it up. So after 39 years of this or so, and an entire new generation being brought up this way, and all of the people that had set out from Egypt have now perished, Yahweh is finally ready to lead them into the promised land. So Yahweh takes Moses up to the top of Mount Nebo and showed him the land from Gilead to Dan and all this land, and says, this is the land that I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Oh, and I promised it to you, but you know what? I've let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it. And Moses, the servant of Yahweh, died there in Moab. Then it says, Moses was 120 years old, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. Well, then why did he perish? Well, because Yahweh willed it. He probably struck him down with a plague like all the other leaders of the tribes. Now Joshua was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. So that power he had put on Moses transferred to somewhere else, and then the story goes on, but we're going to stop here. So wasn't that just a beautiful story? Don't you just feel all warm and fuzzy inside? Yahweh couldn't stand to be around his own chosen people. He's wiping them out 15,000 at a time. So how do you think he feels about the non-chosen people? But, you know, don't let it get to you. Don't let it make you upset. Everything that you've ever believed about Jesus, you can still have that. It's just that the Judeo-Roman Church of Rome that formed afterwards couldn't just have a religion of love and peace, because it's hard to justify all kinds of conquests with just that. What really happened was Jesus was coming to save them from Yahweh, not for Yahweh. And he lived by all of these ridiculous rules that Yahweh had set in place to fulfill a contract, which I'll do a video on at some point. But since Jesus had gone to Jerusalem and did all of the things he did, people were already thinking that he must be from this God Yahweh. So they just ran with that and slapped the Old Testament right on the front of the New Testament. And then for who knows how long, they taught all of this in Latin that wasn't an actual spoken language. And it wasn't until the Gutenberg press, when they started translating it into a language that people could actually read, then the Protestant Reformation took off. But at that point, it was so ingrained in everyone that, yeah, Yahweh must be the father of Jesus, that nobody questioned it. Well, except for the Gnostics, and then they got offed by the hundreds of thousands. So, hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.